Hey y'all, welcome back to Hopeful and Wholesome, and welcome back to another episode to dive into your conditioning. I've really been enjoying these solo episodes where I've been diving into different aspects of conditioning, and we've talked about just conditioning as a whole. We've talked about how we can kind of recognize conditioning with the not self theme. And I have a few episodes here kind of picking apart some of these pieces. And today I'm talking about the pleasure wound and how women were taught that enjoying their bodies and their life was dangerous. And we're going to talk about how to heal it. So let's talk about pleasure for a second. What is pleasure? I'll just start with the basics, because I think sometimes just the word pleasure for some people can make you feel a little squeamish, maybe a little uncomfortable, a little like, ooh, like that's a dangerous word or like a naughty word, or maybe you grew up thinking that. Maybe you don't think it anymore, but at one point you did. And I think for a lot of women, the word pleasure is associated with sex, and that's why it can make them feel uncomfortable. And that's the only way that we know about pleasure, the only thing we can associate with pleasure. And that's what we do for pleasure is sex. And this is for a lot of reasons. There's a lot to unpack there. But before we do, I want to continue unpacking the word itself, because yes, pleasure can be related to sex, but there are a lot more things in the world that are pleasurable besides sex. And if this is a novel concept for you right now, or something maybe you've never thought of, this is a pattern you want to take mental note of and go back to, because this is the wounded pattern that I'm talking about. So if I were to ask you, list me 10 things that you would associate with pleasure, like you personally, not people or humans or women in general, but you personally. If you had to list 10 things you would associate with pleasure, would you be able to create that list? Like maybe take a second just to think about it. Now, if you can or can't, we'll come back to that. But my next question for you, how easy is it for you to actually fully receive pleasure? Whether it's related to one of those 10 things you were able to list, or whether it's related to sex. And it might be interesting to see if your answer differs, if you're talking about pleasure from sex or pleasure not from sex. Like that's an interesting thing to come back to. So maybe also dock that one and come back to that. But when I say fully receive, I mean, can you do it? Can you fully receive it without guilt, without having to explain yourself, without shame, without questioning it, without needing to get other things done before receiving it? But can you actually fully receive pleasure? Something that is on that list that you would make. Can you fully receive it? Are there any feelings of unworthiness? And maybe depends on the thing, right? If you have your list, I would really recommend going back and doing this. If you're not in a place where you can do this right now, if you can go back and make a list, because it might depend on the thing on the list, right? For any of these things on your list of things that bring you pleasure, things that are pleasurable, are there any feelings of unworthiness or danger or guilt or shame associated with like fully receiving pleasure from that thing? I'm willing to bet that at least something on your list brings up at least one of those feelings. And honestly, if it doesn't, the conditioning might be deeper than you think. Or I'm sure you can think of a time where you did feel this way, but I feel like sometimes if we're like, oh no, I feel totally worthy about pleasure, but then there's areas of stuckness in your life, like the conditioning might be so thick that you're not even recognizing where you're rejecting and not fully receiving it. Because the fact is that pleasure, and this is pleasure in the body, pleasure through sensation or rest or food or life experiences or sexuality, pleasure in general. Pleasure has been systematically weaponized against women through purity culture, through diet culture, through religious conditioning. And if you go back and listen to my episode with Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton, we talk about this specifically around purity culture and kind of how that plays a part. But the result of that is this deep pleasure wound, a nervous system that associates pleasure or enjoyment with guilt or with danger or unworthiness or shame. And this is just how we have been conditioned. So if we were to talk about the delivery mechanism for this wound, it shows up in a lot of different ways. And of course, overall, if we wanted to give it a collective term, it's the patriarchy. And I'm sure you knew I would say that. But if we want to get a little bit more specific, it's these different arms of the patriarchy. And I do want to get a little bit more specific here because I think it's important to really name how we got here. Because we can't change and shift into a new paradigm until we know where we are and we know how we got here, because that's how we figure out how to do things differently and how to think differently and how to approach things differently from a different perspective, right? So naturally, patriarchy would say a woman's pleasure is unimportant to a system that is all about male domination and power and control and extraction. And pleasure has no place in any one of those. It just doesn't. But let's see how we got here, how the patriarchy has gotten this belief across to us over centuries. Because it's not just like they spoon feed us like, oh, your pleasure doesn't have a place here. It is very sneaky through, like I said before, these different arms of patriarchy, like purity culture or diet culture. And there's also this just patriarchal conditioning, and that has been put into laws and how, the medical system was set up. So let's talk about I want to talk a little bit about some specific aspects of patriarchal conditioning from a historical lens. And if you follow me on social media or you get my emails, you know that I was a history minor in college, and you just can't take the history out of the history nerd. And that's what I am. So I love to bring this historical context here to give us a little bit of background of how we got here. And I'm just going to list a few things here. I'm not going to go deep into all the things. Okay, so there's this one concept. This actually started in the BC era onward, and this idea of the wandering womb. So from ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates to more modern day, I'm using air quotes here, Victorian era doctors, it was believed that the uterus could physically move through the body that could cause anything from fainting to paralysis to grief and rage. And the uterus was the cause of anything that a woman was dealing with. And they called it hysteria, it's from the Greek word for womb. So the word hysterical, you see where I'm going here. So this hysteria was defined by excessive emotions, resulting in emotionally charged behavior. So if you were feeling any sort of extreme emotion, grief, rage, fatigue, frustration, like any of it, all of this was a symptom of a misbehaving uterus. And back until, this is still in the 1900s, they were doing hysterectomies for that reason. They thought that this was the result of, the uterus was the result, that a woman's imbalanced emotional state was the result of the uterus. So if we take it out, that'll fix it, right? So that was layered into how the world was operating from 400 BC. That was lots and lots of generations ago. And then you have things that were layered into how the medical system was set up. Like if we're going to keep going with the body on that same note of what's happening, we're going to still kind of follow that thread talking about a woman's body. The only organ in the human body that exists for pure pleasure is the clitoris. And this specific organ was removed from all medical texts in 1948. Just removed. They took it out. They thought it wasn't worth studying. Why would we need to study this part of the body where women receive pleasure? Like that is literally the only, there's no other reason for it to be there. There's no other purpose of it except for that. Is the only organ in the human body that exists purely for pleasure. Men don't have that. Men feel pleasure on parts of their body that they also use for other things. It's the only function that the clitoris has, and they took it out of the textbook, if that tells you anything. And it took decades and decades later for them to finally put it back in, when they finally realized that, hey, this might be interesting, that there's all these thousands of nerve endings in this one organ in the body and it's for pleasure. Maybe it's worth studying. Decades. It took them decades to put it back in the textbooks. And then if we look at some other historical contexts, we think of laws and rules that were made about women and about women's bodies that affected how we saw our own bodies, like we as women saw our own bodies, and the shame that was built around our bodies than just regular functions of the body, and just kind of shame and guilt for just existing, honestly, and for being the ones who reproduce and being the ones who have periods. So there was the Comstock Act of 1873 that made it illegal to send obscene materials through the mail and defined it to include any information about contraception, reproductive health, or female anatomy. So women literally could not legally receive information about their own bodies through the mail. Doctors couldn't send them pamphlets. Educators couldn't distribute materials. This law existed until 100 years later. That's not a lie. So for 100 years, that law existed, where women cannot learn about their bodies. What do you think that does to a woman who any information about, again, natural functions of their body reproductive health, female anatomy, was considered obscene or lewd material. What do you think that does to a woman? What do you think that does to a woman and how she sees herself? The shame around her body, her cycle, her pleasure. Again, we're talking about female anatomy here. Of course, there's going to be shame attached to it there. And then there's this other law, the theory of menstrual disability. This was in the 18th and 19th century that said that women's bodies were governed entirely by the reproductive system. Any mental stimulation, whether that is educational, intellectual, just any sort of mental stimulation that involved the mind, was dangerous and had consequences. And that because women had periods, because they menstruated, it was dangerous for them to learn anything because menstruation affected them so much that it was dangerous for them to think and to have a period at the same time. And so this law was put into place to keep them out of higher education, to keep them out of the workforce, to keep them from working, because they were impaired so much by their menstruation that they required rest for the full duration of their cycle. They should not be mentally stimulated or intellectually stimulated at all. And this is justification for keeping them out of universities, out of the workforce. Then you have all of these things built, right, from centuries and centuries and centuries past. That was all reinforced by purity culture. We've talked about purity culture on the show before. I'll put the link in the show notes for the episode I have all about it, where we dive really deep into purity culture. But essentially, if you haven't listened to that episode, essentially this is a belief system that teaches women that their bodies are inherently problematic. And I mean, I say teaches women, it teaches everybody that. It teaches men and women that women's bodies are inherently problematic. They're not trustworthy. They're not safe. They need to be constantly monitored or managed or controlled. And it is just this source of danger to themselves and to others. And it operates through shame. We've talked about shame so much on the show before because this is the easiest way to control anybody is through shame. And for women, it's shame about desire, wanting things, needing things, shame about appetite. This is how diet culture came about. Food, pleasure, any of those things. Shame about rest, success, visibility, the body itself, how it looks, what it does, what it feels. Shame about emotions. Shame about being too much, too big, too loud, too sensitive, too anything, just about who you were as a human, really. And this shame becomes so internalized that you don't need anyone else to shame you anymore because you do it to yourself. That's how purity culture works. And when you're born into it, like I was, you're born with that. You don't have to be taught. Like it's in your cells, it's in your DNA, it's in your genes because it's been taught for so long, because you're taught that the good woman is the one who wants less and who doesn't take up too much space. And the virtuous woman is the one who needs less. She doesn't ask for too much and she's meek and quiet. Goodness and smallness are the same thing. Those are the things that's how a good woman should be. Again, back to going to diet culture. Diet culture grew out of purity culture 100%. And I remember when I first saw this gal on Instagram that I follow a while back had this whole article about it. And this was a long time ago, and I can't give her credit because I can't remember who it was, but I'm pretty sure like that's all she talks about on her page. And it was just mind blown that I had never put that together before, the whole diet culture thing, the purity culture thing, because if goodness equals smallness, then we have to be as small as we can, right? And diet culture makes it where you have self-control and you have discipline and you can build yourself to be as small as possible because that is what a good woman does. And a woman with discipline and self-control. There are still people that teach this stuff on Instagram. Like I see people doing these stitches on Instagram for women who are still preaching this. These women who are not preaching very good relationships with food or their bodies. That's what they're saying. That being skinny is a sign that you have self-control and you have discipline and that you care about yourself. And the skinnier, the better. And like, this is all diet culture BS. And this all comes from purity culture. It's, when you're tying like virtue or value to food, like things that are good or bad, this is all patriarchy. That's what it is. And so being the good girl, quote, good girl, right? This is purity culture 101. This is you suppressing your needs, not being too much, not needing too much, being low maintenance. Have you ever said that about like something to brag about, like something to like, oh, I'm so low maintenance. I remember thinking that. And I remember being told that because as relative to my sister growing up, I was the low maintenance one. I was seeing all the things, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to act like that. I saw what was happening as the little sister. And so being the low maintenance one was, you were praised for that. Oh, she's quiet. She doesn't need much. She doesn't, right? That is all purity culture, patriarchy, whatever you want to call it. For me, it's all interchangeable. And, following the rules was safety. That's what good girls do. Questioning the rules was dangerous. And trusting external authority, the rules, the external rules over any inner knowing that you had was presented as wisdom. And so you shut down your inner voice, your body signals, your gut, your intuition, all of that, because that was not something to be trusted. You had to listen to what everybody else, what the rules say, right? Hunger was something to control. Desire was something to suppress. Rest was something that you earned. And pleasure was something to be suspicious of, really, because a good woman doesn't need, period. Like there's no reason to even fill in the blank there. And all of this that I've just talked about, the laws, the way we think, purity culture, all of it has one thing in common, and it's shame. Shame is the easiest and cheapest mechanism of control, and is the mechanism that patriarchy uses the most. If you can shame women enough, you can keep them under control, keep them quiet, keep them out of men's business. And in this case, if you can shame them enough about anything remotely related to pleasure, then they're going to let go of any desires or needs. They're going to stay silent. They're going to, remain in the background, kind of wallflowers, kind of, let the men take the lead, not needing too much, not speaking too much, which allows the men to maintain power and control. And that's how they've done it for generations. We have been systemically shamed from our pleasure, even from the simplest form of pleasure. The simplest thing is rest. We feel like we have to earn it. Or maybe it doesn't apply to us because blank, you fill in the blank, because I'm a mom, because I have other people to take care of, because my needs come last, because I have to take care of everybody else first, because I have too much to do, because if I slow down, I'm going to get behind, because I'm ambitious and I'm a go-getter and I'm focused and I'm disciplined and I'm determined. Like the list goes on. We can fill in the blank for anything. Rest doesn't apply to me. I don't need the rest because blank. We can literally think of any excuse to not slow down. Women can. We can think of any excuse to not slow down and rest. And it all comes down to how the patriarchy has shamed us into thinking it's wrong or bad or we're not worthy of it. And so we've absorbed this pleasure wound from all of these places, from diet culture, from media and beauty standards, from academia and achievement culture, from family systems, even from wellness culture. Purity culture shows up here too. Just the whole thing about clean eating and being good and following the rules and saying this is good and this is bad, like all of it. It's all there. So we can see how this has been ingrained in us. Like this has been absorbed from so many different avenues, from so many different places. And as I said in the episode about purity culture, like you didn't have to grow up in church to be inundated with everything that purity culture has to give. You didn't have to step a foot in church because it is in every facet of our culture. You could not escape diet culture. If you've been around for a while, if you grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, I mean, even now, it is still prevalent now. And sometimes I think just because of like the little bubble that I've built with my social media algorithm, it's like astrology, politics, human design, and happy positive affirmation type stuff. Like I've really intentionally built my algorithm. But if I venture out, or every now and then when somebody, something pops up from somebody that I don't follow, I'm like, oh, this stuff is still pervasive. Like this stuff is still so thick out there. You have women. And I think this is what hurts me the most, is that you still have women teaching this. Like we can badger men all we want about, oh, men, the patriarchy, blah. Like we can get on them all we want. But the thing is, it's not just men, and it's never been just men. Women play into the patriarchy just as much. And this isn't to shame or blame anyone, because I think sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes it's just the conditioning is so deep that I think some women don't realize. Now, I do think some of them do, but I think some of them don't realize how harmful the things are that they're standing on their soapboxes are preaching about, how harmful it is to women. And we're teaching that, the skinnier the better, and skinny means that you love yourself, and like all these kind of messages. This is just dripping in patriarchal conditioning that I want us to move away from. It's so harmful to women. It's so harmful to our self-worth and our self-love and how we value ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we take care of ourselves. And that's why the pleasure wound, I think, is one that if you're going to address anything in some sort of order, like what should I address first? I think this one is so critical because it impacts so much of how we show up in life, how we speak, how we be, how we're doing things, how we take care of ourselves, how our kids and our family see us take care of ourselves. All of this, the pleasure wound is going to impact all of this. And so what does it look like to reclaim our pleasure? What is the path back? First, my favorite thing is from one of my mentors. I mentioned that I've also had on the podcast before, Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton. And it's just titrating these little small doses of pleasure into seemingly menial tasks. Let me give you some examples. It's kind of the idea of romanticizing your life and finding little ways to romanticize everything that you do. So can you drink water out of a fancy wine glass? Can you sit in the sunshine while you do your work or work on your next project? Can you dress up fancy for no reason, just because it feels good? Can you wear extra jewelry just because it feels good? Can you find your favorite music in a tea mug when you're sitting at your desk to do a boring task or admin work? Can you give yourself a little extra time for a bubble bath instead of rushing through the shower? I know these sound so simple and silly maybe for you. And you might be thinking like, how the heck does this help me get past any of this stuff? But these little moments compound. And they go a long way when they compound. It's building those new neural pathways so your body recognizes and accepts the pleasure when it comes. And it's no longer something that's associated with danger or shame or guilt. And it's no longer this thing we do to like treat ourselves or like we're calling it self-care. It's just how we are. Like this is just regular everyday life. This is how I am. I drink my water out of a fancy wine glass. I put fancy earrings and my diamond necklace on to vacuum my house. Like it just becomes who we are because it feels good. Period. The end. No explanation needed. That's the other thing. Can you do these things without any need to justify or explain? Just do it because I'm doing it because it feels good. That's it. Period. Once you begin titrating this is retraining, rewiring your body and your brain. And it's practicing pleasure as this nervous system state and not an event. Like I am in a state of pleasure all the time. It's not just when I'm creating these little special moments. I know how to find pleasure in anything and everything because that's just who I am. This is how you reclaim pleasure as sovereignty rather than just doing it as self-care, because I think this can so get convoluted so easily. And that's how we kind of get into the whole thing of self-care where we see self-care as, bubble baths and manicures and pedicures, where this can be like, yeah, sure, you could still say that, but can that just be, I'm treating myself because I'm treating myself, period. And if you're wondering why you're listening to this, that if you still feel some resistance to pleasure, if maybe some of what I've shared is resonating to you, but there still feels like there's these gaps or some things that maybe they don't ring true, or you still feel this resistance to kind of accepting those things, like taking those things on as your own beliefs. But something is telling you that, yes, this applies to you more than you know. This is a perfect opportunity for you to like untangle these sticky spots in a frequency recalibration session. I just want to throw that out there because in a frequency recalibration session, I use the Healy device, which basically reads your energy field, your aura, your energy field. Like if we wanted to hear what your energy field had to say, like we wanted to put words and language to why you have resistance, why you are feeling stuck, why you're not able to reach the thing that you're working towards or calibrating to, kind of the idea of like growing into that next level self. I don't know if that resonates with you. It may not, but it's basically giving words to your energy field of where you are holding yourself back. Where are the sticky parts? And I love this for the pleasure wound because sometimes it shows, well, I can't even say sometimes, all the time. Every one of the sessions I've ever done, it has been like these mind-blowing moments where my clients are like, holy moly, I had no idea that was there. I had no idea this was beneath the surface. I had no idea I was still holding on to that. I had no idea, it's always been a mind blown moment. And it has every single time, even if they're not doing it specifically to uncover things around the pleasure wound, it has every single time. I can say this as a matter of fact, something has come up around pleasure and how they weren't receiving it, how they weren't, there was maybe shame or guilt around it, but there's always been something uncovered. So I just want to throw it out there. If you feel like there's some sticky spots around it for you, I'll put a link to the show notes. It's a really good place for a frequency recalibration session. So what I want to leave you here for this episode, all about the pleasure wound, is I want you to see pleasure as, first of all, pleasure as your birthright, rather than seeing it as self-care or an indulgence. Claim it as your birthright. Like, this is sovereignty. Can you reclaim pleasure as sovereignty of something that is my birthright, that I was born to experience? Can you, as a woman, claim that I was born to feel pleasure every day of my life? I was born to feel pleasure every day of my life. Can you use it as a compass for what's actually yours? Can you let that be what leads you to the next thing, to your next level of growth, or the next thing in your business, your career, the next version of you that you're creating? Can you let pleasure be the thing that leads you there? I'm only following the things that bring me pleasure. Can you be bold enough to take the next step with that perspective? I hope that this resonates with you and that this short little episode gave you some insight on where the pleasure wound came from, how it got there, how it got in all of us, and how we can flip this script, how we can flip it on its head. If you're looking for a deeper dive into some things that are going on in your body around this, the link is in the show notes for a frequency recalibration session. I would love to see you in one of those, and I will see you in the next episode.